What are some of the most effective NLP techniques whenever you want to convince somebody about anything? And after you have learned those, nobody will ever be able to tell you no about anything. Or close to. Basically, we have a zillion of NLP techniques out there to communicate more easily, and when people enter that field, they are kind of lost, they don't really know where to start, and they really try to buy more books, but it is just overwhelming their mind. I will do my best here to simplify to 3 techniques that I think are more than enough in most cases, and some of them are pretty counterintuitive. You may not think they would be that useful, but I can assure you from experience they are. The first one is to use the technique called future pacing in a different way than what you have been taught. Future pacing in NLP usually means in coaching, okay, paint a bright and beautiful future for your clients, make them envision great things in their future to motivate them. Yes, that might be relevant sometimes when you work with some clients. However, in many situations, especially when you have opposing views with somebody in your daily life, or when it is a client, but the client is kind of extremely resistant and stuck in his own mind, then I like to use on the reverse the negative future pacing, meaning what are you the most scared of in the future? The best example possible is when people oppose their views on political topics. If they say we should vote for this politician because he or she is the best one, fine. Can you clarify, in your opinion, what is the worst thing that could happen if that one you want to vote for is not being elected? If the candidate you hate is being elected, can you tell me, for the sake of my understanding, what is the worst thing that might happen, that will happen, if that candidate is getting elected? And the difficult part, I know, is to let them talk. Because if you try to suppress their words, they will try to do the same with you. When you actually let people talk, you let them express their fears, their anxieties, what they think is going wrong, what they think is bad, then you unload a lot of emotional charge, and then from there any idea or compromise you want to get them to will be 100 times easier, because they have unloaded the emotional pressure that was making them resist against you. Once this is released, then very simple phrases will find their way to their unconscious mind. But if you try to oppose argument against argument against argument, they will do the same with you. They will just, if you push somebody, they will push back. That is the easiest thing ever. But if you ask them very simply, okay, let's say I am wrong, let's say you're right, what is the worst thing that can happen in your opinion? And then you ask them to specify, coming back to the meta model, specifying information. How do you know this will happen? How do you know this will be the truth? How do you know your view of the world is the only possible thing that will happen? How do you know that? You keep digging into the facts of what is their presupposition, where does that come from, and how can they be so sure that their paranoid view of the world in the future is the only possible thing that can happen if this election goes that way, or even if it is not about politics. In any topic, what do you think might go wrong in your perception, and then make them elaborate. Once they have unveiled all their beliefs, then extremely easy, you just take the root cause of their negative beliefs and you reframe that belief. Technique number 2, and that was known as the agreement frame into the original NLP models, I think. You are going to reframe things always by starting your phrases by yes and. Most people use the word but. You say this, but I disagree. You say this, but what about that? What about isms, obviously. What about that? Yes, but you're wrong because. If whenever you say something, you start your phrase by yes and, yes, you could be right about this politician being a douchebag, and what I would like you to consider is yes and, or somebody who is reluctant to buying your services if you sell anything. Yes, the product might not fit your needs, and what I would like to tell you is, and then whatever you say. Starting your phrase by yes and is kind of cancelling a lot of the defensive positions of your interlocutor, because you are setting their unconscious mind into an agreement frame, into a frame where they are going to agree with you. Just think about it from a basic perspective. When you discuss with a friend of yours, how many times do you say, but what about this? But you're wrong because... When you are with a friend, you don't really argue that much, in most cases, unless you are that type of friend, but I don't think most people are. So you usually say yes and this, and that, yes, definitely, and this, oh, you're so right, and I saw this. You use the word and. If you use that same word with somebody you initially disagree with, you're going to lead them into your way of thinking anyway, because you are setting their mind into the frame that they know as being the friendly frame, as being the frame that they use when they communicate with their friends. In the same way, when you communicate with your friends, you are much less defensive. You are much more in the agreement. You're yes and this and that. So once you start your phrases by yes and, the person will naturally put themselves into a space of receiving your information instead of defending what they believed. That is much more useful whenever you want to reframe anything in any conversation. And technique number 3 is more internal this time. So far we talked about linguistic strategies. Right now it is more something you do inside your own head, either ahead of the conversation or during conversation if you have been practicing that as some meditative process in the beginning. You are going to use time distortion. Basically, going in time in your head, in your imagination, past the point where the person has already agreed upon what you wanted to say. If you place yourself, if you set yourself as an enemy, people are going to talk to you like an enemy. However, if you can notice in the back of your head, what would that look like if that person you are arguing with had already agreed with anything you say, at least at this moment with the conversation at hand. If that person had finally opened their eyes and saw what you meant, what would they look like? What would they look like? How would they interact with you? What would they say differently? What is maybe some new belief or some new perception they would have that they didn't have by this point before you started talking with them? What would have changed if they had already agreed? When you have an image of that in your mind, when you have a clear picture of that in your head, then you can notice, how can I communicate so that this outcome in my mind becomes real? How could I change my communication? Maybe I could change my tone of voice. Maybe I could talk about a different topic of conversation. What could I do differently so that this outcome I have in my mind is a certainty that it will happen? If you start the conversation from an attacker vibe, from an enemy position, obviously people are going to defend their positions against you. If you start from the presupposition, well, they are going to agree anyway. It is just that they don't know it yet. And then you might even get into the position of, some Indian guru or those peaceful monks who never argue with anyone, because you talk from an assertive, calm, aware standpoint where you listen patiently, calmly to the counter arguments, because in your head you are not arguing anymore, you are just reassuring a young child who hasn't learned the right things yet. You stop being somebody who is in confrontation and you start getting into the role of somebody who is teaching. I am educating those people into what they don't know about yet. From that position, many people won't as easily argue against you anymore, because they won't find the grab to hit your emotions or anything. You come from a presupposition that you will find common ground. You don't come anymore from the standpoint of an attacker. You come from the standpoint of we are going to find a common ground. It is okay. You have some fears, some anxieties, some anger. I understand. Let's clarify what's happening. And from there, we are going to get into some compromise. That suits both of us, by the way. It's not about forcing, it's about finding compromise between the two people. So as a quick recap, technique number one, negative future pacing, calling out specifically to what they are the most scared of in the future so that they unload the pressure. Technique number two, the agreement frame, yes, and I agree this might be terrible in the future, and what I would like you to pay attention to is this and that. And technique number three, the time distortion in your own head as a kind of self-hypnosis meditative process, analyzing in your head when you're calm by yourself, what would they look like if they were already agreeing with me? What would their face look like? What would their voice tonality would be like? How would they interact with me? And from that position, locked in your mind, you notice what new questions could you ask, which new phrases could you say, and how might you change your whole behavior. Maybe you need to stand differently with them, more erect or less erect, whatever. Just notice what pops up in your mind when you think about how can you change your communication so that they naturally agree with you anyway. And if you want to go further with all those communication skills and figure out how you could apply all of them in your own life, you have a small document down below called The 7 Steps to Master Sleight of Mouth in the description, which will teach you and show you some of the best ways to reframe a conversation, a belief, or anything whenever you are interacting with somebody who might have a different belief system, somebody who might not completely see things your way, and it will not necessarily force anyone to believe what you believe, but at least it will set you as an authority on your own beliefs. Instead of being swallowed into the map of the world of somebody else, you are going to say assertively the things you believe into, and people won't be able anymore to try to manipulate you into any disempowering worldviews that you don't wish to believe in. That is down below. Be my guest if you want to read that. In the meantime, thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon in the next video, and you can subscribe if you feel ready to learn more about that.